Have you ever wanted to create a custom animated top bar in your NativeScript app? I'm going to show you how to create a clone of the Twitter timeline action bar in NativeScript, coming up in this video. Hey, what's going on? This is Alex from nativescripting.com. If you want to learn more about NativeScript, make sure you subscribe to this channel and click on the little bell so you don't miss anything. NativeScript provides a pretty powerful animation API, but the question is, how do we leverage this API and create smooth, unobtrusive micro-interactions that are triggered by all the different gestures that we can use on a device? It's this gestures and animations interaction that's not always easy and straightforward to understand. And that's why this tutorial is a bit on the longer side. But there are a lot of things to cover, so let's dig in. Let's kick things off with just the Hello World template here. This is the template you get if you just run tns create and then an app name. This is the TypeScript version. So here we are on the main page.xml file. There is an action bar here, and you might be wondering, why don't we just animate the action bar? Well, you can. The action bar is inheriting from the view class, which is animatable, but it's going to limit you in certain ways. If you define your own view to replace the action bar, you'll have a lot more options. So I'm going to remove the action bar, and let's just get rid of all these comments too. Now I want to have a layout here on this page just to contain all my stuff. I'm going to make this a grid layout because that's the most versatile one. I'm going to give this a class of wrapper. And I know that my grid layout is going to have two rows. One is going to be for the action bar, the custom action bar that I'm about to make. That's the animated one. And the other row is going to contain all my other stuff, whatever that may be. So I'm going to add the rows property. The first one is going to be auto, and the second one is going to be star. That's the amount of space they're going to take up. Let's close out the grid layout. We'll come back to the stack layout. Don't worry about that right now. Okay, so inside the grid layout, we need two layouts inside of there. One is going to be a scroll view. Let's give it a class of inner, and this is going to be in row 1. So you might know that rows in grid layouts are numbered starting with 0. Why am I assigning row 1 to the scroll view? Well, this is going to make sense in a little bit. Let me add the other layout and then I'll explain. So under the scroll view, I will add another grid layout, and this is going to be our bar. So I'm going to give this the class bar, and I'm going to put this one in row 0. Okay, so normally you'd define these in order, right? So you'd have your grid layout up here, which is row 0, and then row 1, and then row 2, and so on. And that makes sense. However, in our case, we want the scroll view to be rendered under the grid layout. So we want our scrolling area of the page to be under the bar that's going to stick out. If you put things in this order, that's not going to happen. The grid layout is going to be rendered first, and then the scroll view is going to be rendered on top of that, even though they're going to be taking up two different rows. Because we're thinking about animating these, we need to think ahead a little bit and render the grid layout. Even though it's row 0, we're going to render that after the scroll view. This will put the grid layout on top of the scroll view when we're doing the animation. All right, let's give our grid layout an ID of bar. Let's give our scroll view an ID of scroll view. And we're assigning IDs to these views so that we can programmatically control them in the code later on. Now inside the scroll view, I want something that I can scroll, right? So I want something long enough, some content that activates my scrolling so I can demonstrate the scroll. I already added a few images to the application code, so let's just set up an image tag here. And the source property is going to be this tweet image from the images folder. I'm just going to copy and paste this a few times so it looks like our Twitter feed. All right. And just so you know that this is not a static thing, that we still have the capability to function and interact with the app, I'm going to take this button and label down here that we had, and I'm just going to drag them into the scroll view as well. This way you'll see that our view model is still working and the button still works. I can now delete the stack layout down here, and we're almost done setting this up. Now for the page, we want to hide the action bar because even though we've removed the action bar definition, on Android, action bars are rendered by default. So we need to set action bar hidden to true, and we do that on the page itself. All right, so we have the page, we have the grid layout to contain the whole thing. That's the wrapper. We have our scroll view and the content. Now we need to handle the bar. So what do we want to display in the bar? I'm just going to paste in a few things here. This is going to be the content of the bar, which is going to be a grid layout that arranges an image that's going to be a Twitter avatar Then the name of the page is going to be home. That's going to be rendered as a label. And then another image here at the end on the right side, which is the Twitter star. So let's take a look. So here we are. There's a couple of things we need to do still. One is we need to add some styles here to make these images smaller. And the other one is I see 42 tabs left. That tells me that we're seeing this label right here. And that tells me that we also don't have any way to view all these items. So we need a stack layout inside here to arrange these inner components. I'm going to wrap all this stuff inside the scroll view, inside a stack layout. And let's add another file here for the main page CSS. Remember, NativeScript, when you have a CSS file that's named exactly the same as the XML file, it'll automatically be loaded and linked to that XML file by the framework. So we need a class for wrapper. Let's give it a background color of white. Then a class for bar. I'll do the same thing for the background color here. And also inner. Let's also give it a background color of white. Now for the bar, I want to add a little border at the bottom. So I'm going to define border color or border bottom color. And that's going to be a slightly grayish color. And then I want this border to be really thin. So I'm going to set the border bottom width to 0.5. Great. Elon Musk tweets. Okay. So you can see that because we have enough content in here, the scroll view works. There is the Android version. And here are 2 iOS versions here. And you can see why I left the tab button linked to the view model still in here, just to show you that it still works. I'm also going to paste in some styles for the avatar and that star image on the right side. So this is looking pretty good. We have an action bar and our scroll view goes under it. But we're not here for that. We're here to animate that action bar. And we do that in the code. How do we get access to all these UI elements in the code? Well, each view exposes a loaded event. Since everything we need to manipulate through animation is inside this wrapper grid layout, we're going to attach the loaded event and the handler here. I'm going to call the handler onWrapperLoaded. I'm going to copy the name and export this handler in the code behind. And this is going to pass us some event args. That has an object on it, which we know is the grid layout. But I don't care that it's a grid layout because all I care about is that it's a view. Grid layout and all the other layouts inherit from view, and the view class is really all we need to animate this. So I'm going to cast this to view, and Visual Studio Code is automatically going to import view for me. Now I want to be a little bit more clear about where my import is coming from. So even though I could import view from UI page, I'm actually going to import it directly from the view module, just so I can be explicit about where it's coming from. Now once this grid layout view loads, I want to store a reference to it locally in a variable. Let's call it wrapper layout. We also need a few references to child views so we can animate them. And a simple way to do that is to reference the page, and then we can drill down through the page. Every view, including this wrapper, has a page property on it that references the enclosing page. I'm going to grab the page and store it off in a local page constant. By the way, we've already had a reference to page because we attached the navigating to event to the page. And the navigating to event happens before any of our loaded events for views. So we could save this instance of the page and reuse that here. But this is just another way I wanted to show you how to get a hold of the page. Now let's get a hold of the scroll view. So I'm going to create another variable here called scroll view. And this is going to be of type scroll view. I could use a view here because scroll view inherits from view as well, but I'll just use scroll view for this one. Let's import scroll view from TNS Core Modules UI scroll view, and we'll set that to undefined initially. And now we can use the getViewById function from the page to get a hold of our scroll view. We also need that bar at the top, so let's create another variable here called bar. It's going to be a view, and now we can just use that getViewById to get a hold of the bar and store it. I'll just cast these to scroll view and view to eliminate any ambiguities. Now let's initialize a few positional properties to get us ready for animation. Inside the bar, I have a couple of images and a label. Now because I want the bar to start out in the closed position, I want those images and the label to be initially hidden. So I'm going to set the opacity of each one of those to 0. And the way I can do that is by iterating over all the child views of the bar. Each view has this eachChildView function, which is going to give me the child views. And this function expects that we return some Boolean, so I'm going to return true here. But before I do that, I'm going to set the opacity to 0. So when this initially loads, those items will be hidden. All right, let's also set a few constants up here. Now these are adjustable, so you can play around with this. But I'm gonna use the values that I've had because I want this to look like the Twitter version. We're gonna have a min stretch constant and a max stretch constant. This will give us the amount that the bar is gonna travel during the animation. Min stretch will be 0 and max stretch will be 40. So the maximum the bar will slide down will be 40 units. I also want to make sure that we set the animation duration, and we want that to be consistent. So I'm going to set the anim duration constant to 250. I found that 250 is a good animation speed for micro interactions. It doesn't get in the way. Anything slower than that will really kind of drag out the user experience. I also want to have a reusable animation here, and we'll get back to this. This is the animation class that's coming from NativeScript. I'm going to set that to undefined. Let's import the animation class from NativeScript, and that's coming from TNS Core Modules UI Animation. Okay, so when we initialize this, I want that bar to be hidden. So I'm going to set bar translate Y. I'm going to set it equal to the current position in the vertical axis minus max stretch. I'm also going to programmatically set the bar height, and that's also going to be max stretch. So you can see that I'm reusing this max stretch everywhere. So then if I ever want to make my bar taller, all I got to do is just go up here and change this max stretch value in one place. Let's also set our scroll view. We're going to set the margin top to kind of butt up against the bar. So I'm going to set it to -1 times max stretch, which is going to set my margin top to -40 initially. And this is where we are. On iPhone 6, you can see that we have a status bar and we have a scroll view right under it. Okay, here's iPhone X with the notch. And same thing, we have a little status bar with the scroll view and an Android status bar and scroll view. Well, guess what? We're done with setup. Whew. All the rest of the stuff we're going to be doing is animation, also known as the fun part. Now, to accomplish the animation that we want to get with this Twitter bar clone, we're going to need to handle two different gesture types, a pan gesture, that's a drag, and a swipe. And we're also going to need to define two different types of animation, an automated animation using the animation APIs that come with NativeScript, and a manual animation. As far as gestures go, the pan gesture is the one where you put your finger down and you slowly do a drag. In our case, it's either up or down. There's also a swipe gesture. Now, swipe is interpreted by the operating system. So it could be a little different on Android. It could be a little different on iOS. It's the operating system's job to determine the difference between whether you're panning or swiping. Swipe is usually a really quick motion where you put your finger down, do a little swipe, and let go immediately. Now, the pan is considered to be a stateful gesture. So you have your starting state, that's when you put your finger down, then your dragging state, that's the changes, and then your ending state. And we want to handle all three of those states. So we got a lot of work cut out for us here. Let's get to it. Let's handle the swipe scenario first. We're going to go to scroll view, and we're going to handle the swipe gesture by using the on function. The swipe event is going to pass in some args, and that's the swipe gesture event data type. Now, the very first step, and a very important one, is you have to check if the animation is playing, and if it is, you want to cancel it. And that's why we have this animation that's globally available on the page here. So first we're going to test if that animation is not undefined and if the animation is already playing. If that's the case, we want to cancel it. Remember, we're doing a swipe here. So what do we want to animate when we're doing a swipe? Well, we want to animate the scroll view, first of all. We want to animate the bar, and we want to animate all the children of the bar. And we want to do this only when the swipe is down. So we don't want to do any kind of animations when we're swiping up because the Twitter bar only comes out in reaction to a swipe down. Let's do a quick check in the direction of the swipe before we do the logic here. The swipe direction got auto-imported, and I can just choose down from there. So here is the swipe gesture event data that we imported and swipe direction, and they're all coming from gestures. So when we're swiping down, we want to create a new animation. Let's take a look at the constructor definition of the animation. You see that it's taking in an animation definition array, which means we're going to create a few animation definitions and pass them in here. And after that, we just say animation play. This is how you can bunch up a bunch of different animations and trigger them all at once. So let's bunch it up. Here's our first animation definition. I'm going to hit Control Space here inside to see the properties available. So we want to define a few of these. The most important thing is target. We want to tell it what we want to animate. So in this case, we're going to animate the bar. For duration, we want to use that global animation duration that we specified. And what are we going to do with this bar? Well, we're swiping down, so we want it to be translated down. That means X is going to be 0 and Y is going to be set to min stretch. We also don't want this animation to look boring and dead. So we're going to use a curve. And I don't like any of the built-in curves. I mean, you can use them for some things, but I want a very specific type of curve. And I like to use this tool called cubicbezier.com, which lets me kind of draw an animation curve and then click go to preview it. So that red square is what my animation is going to look like. I can just copy the values right from the URL and create my animation curve that way. Let me show you where they go. So I'm going to define curve here, which is going to be a new cubic Bezier animation curve that gets auto-imported. And this takes in 4 numbers. I won't go into what these numbers mean, but just trust me, put them in here and you'll see a difference. These are the values that I got from that website. So there's our definition 1. This is going to animate the bar. I can throw that right into the array, def1. Okay? I think it's time to test this out. I'm going to swipe down and you can see that little bar animated down. Pretty cool, huh? All right. It worked on all the devices. Very cool. So now we need a couple more animations. I'm just going to copy what I had here, paste it here, and this is going to be our definition 2. This time we're going to target the scroll view. We want the duration to be the same. We want the translation to be a little bit different because now we want it to go in the opposite direction. So our scroll view is going to go to max stretch and our curve is going to be the same. Let's add that def2 to our list of animations. And finally, we want the contents of that bar to be animated as well. We want to fade them in. So I want to create as many definitions for animations as there are children of the bar. So I'm going to create an array here called child defs. It's going to be an animation definition array, empty for now. We're going to do the same trick we did before with iterating over the children of the bar. So for each child view, I'm going to create a definition. Let's call it def3. The target is going to be that view. I'm going to make the duration for this content twice as long as the other animations, just so we kind of see it slide into place after the bar has slid down. And finally, the opacity. Since we're fading them in, opacity is going to end up being 1. Let's add each child definition to the child defs array and return true from this function. Finally, we need to put all these child defs into our animation. So I'm going to use this spread operator to add all the elements of the array to this other array. Let's take a look. All right, we got everybody here. I'm going to swipe down. Cool. Swipe down here. All right. Same thing with this one. So our swipe animation is set up and working. Awesome. Notice that the scroll view also animated down. It's very subtle, but that's exactly the point. All right, so we're done with the swipe gesture. Now let's take care of the pan gesture. That's when we're dragging. So I'm going to go over here, scroll view on, and then we'll handle the pan. The pan gesture event sends us the args of the type pan gesture event data. Let's take a look at the args. You'll see that pan gesture event data is different because it has a state. The state represents the different parts of the pan. We have the initial touchdown, that's when the pan begins. Then we have to handle the up and down movement. This is the change state. And then finally, when the finger is released off your device, that's the ending state. So first let's check for the state, and we're going to compare against the gesture state types enum and the began enum value. In this case, we also want to check the animation and make sure that we cancel it in case it is playing. Otherwise, weird stuff is going to happen. Next, what happens if this state is changed? So this is when we're actually dragging. This event handler is going to be triggered every time we make a little drag with our finger, and this animation type is called a synchronous animation because we're synchronously going to be updating the position of our bar and our scroll view in time with the drag. We also want to ever start this animation whenever we're dragging up. That's just to match the Twitter app behavior. And the way we decide that we're dragging up is the delta y will be negative. Once we know we're dragging up, let's calculate the new position. So that's the new y. And we're going to take the scroll view. We're going to take its current y location plus the delta y, that's the change. And we need to subtract the previous translate y. So we don't have that saved yet. but we need to ensure that we save off the previous translate y so we know where to start this animation the next time around. So we need to create prev translate y up here as a global. We're going to set that to 0. Now let's go back here and save off the current location into the previous location. So how do we actually animate this? Well, we want the scrolls view translate y property to follow the new y coordinate. So we're going to set it manually, like that. Now we're done animating the scroll view. We also want to make sure we animate the bar as well so it goes along with the scroll view. But we only want to do this if the new position is less than or equal to max stretch and is greater than or equal to min stretch. We're going to set bar translate y to the new y location minus max stretch. And once we do this, we should be able to go and test this out real quick just to see if we're on the right track. Let's check it out. Our app restarts. Let's test this on Android. I'm going to swipe down and then gradually drag up. And yeah, there it is. It's dragging. Perfect. Let's go ahead and do this on iPhone. And that's working too. Okay, so now you see that we need to animate the children of that bar. So the images and the label that's inside the bar. And we want to animate that gradually as well. You've seen me do this before. We're going to grab each view child of the bar. I'm going to set the opacity to something. But what's this value? Where do we get it? How do we know how far we've panned in order to set the opacity appropriately? Well, we need to calculate it. So we need a new variable here called scale. We're going to need to calculate the distance between min and max, and we need to convert that on a scale of 0 to 1, so it converts to opacity nicely. Let's save that off to a new global variable called previous scale. So right over here, I'm going to call a new function, and I'm going to set prev scale to this function called get scale. I'm going to pass in max stretch and the current new position. I'm just going to go down here and paste in this function. All this function is going to do is just return the numerator divided by the denominator, giving us a little fraction result. That's going to be our scale. So we're going to set the opacity to prev scale and then return true. All right, now when I drag up, you can see that our icon and the navigation bar contents are gradually fading out as I drag. And let's do an Android test. All right, good. That works too. There's one more case we need to handle. What happens if we're dragging this, we get it to the middle point, and then we just stop and let go? You can see that our little icons are visible and our bar is kind of stuck halfway. So let's handle the last scenario for args.state equaling gesture state types ended. Here we're going to do a quick check just to make sure we trigger this animation only in the case where we were dragging up and we let go. And now we need to calculate, do we want to animate up or down and by how much? So we're going to call this trans y. We're going to initialize it to max stretch. Let's do a quick check here. We only want to slide up if we're halfway up, and we want to slide down if we're halfway down. So here we're going to do if the delta y is less than max stretch divided by 2, then we're going to set trans y to min stretch. And just like in the swipe animation, here we need to build up our animation definitions. And we're going to create a new animation and pass in those animation definitions. And then we're going to play the animation. So let's start with these definitions. First definition is going to target the scroll view. We're going to use that same duration constant. And we're going to translate x is going to be 0. And y is going to be that trans y value. And let's also copy our curve. So that's our definition 1. This is going to animate the scroll view. Now we want to animate the bar. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here. Definition 2, and we're going to target the bar. We also want to translate this, but we want it to end up on the opposite side. So trans y minus max stretch. Let's add that to the array. And finally, we want to finish the animation by animating each of the child views of the bar. So let's go ahead and copy this code. We already had this here. Paste this here. Here we are iterating through each of the children of the bar. I'm going to use the regular animation duration for this one. And the opacity is going to be based on trans y. So if trans y is max stretch, then we're going to set it to 1. Otherwise, we'll set it to 0. So if we're snapping up, we want the opacity to be 0. If we're snapping down, we want the opacity to be 1. And let's not forget to add all these animation definitions in the array to the constructor of the animation. And this should do it. Let's check it out. Our app restarts. And on Android, I'm going to swipe down, drag up. And as I'm dragging, our view disappears. If I let go in the middle, it completes that animation. so it snaps up by itself. Let's try iOS. Swipe down, drag up slowly. If I let go, it completes the animation. If I drag down slowly, notice that it's not appearing. So the bar only appears when I swipe down. That means I really want it, and that's how the Twitter one works. Okay, that was a long one. Thanks for sticking it out. In fact, there's one more edge case that I forgot to put into the video, but don't worry, the entire demo is on my GitHub and the link is down below in the description. I got a question for you. Do you want to see more animation-related tutorials? And if so, tell me what framework you use. Do you use Core, do you use Angular, or do you use Vue? Go ahead and answer me right down below, or you can send me a tweet. I'm at Digitalix. My DMs are also available. And make sure you subscribe to this channel to get all the latest tips, tricks, and tutorials about NativeScript, and I will see you next time.